Hey there, welcome. You're likely here because you saw my video on monitoring ThingWorx with Prometheus and Grafana, and today we're going to get into how to set this up for yourself. I'm going to be going over all of these steps quite quickly with the intention just to give you the basis of how I've set it up so that you kind of know a direction to go in and can do your own research and figuring some of these things out if you hit any snags along the way. So let's get right to it. The first thing that I started with on all this is Grafana, Prometheus. Prometheus is really where we just, if we go to Prometheus IO, get started. We're quickly into their documentation. It tells us about how to get this, how to get it updated. Frankly, I like using APT repositories because it just simplifies getting things upgraded and whatnot. So I created a virtual machine. And here we see my Azure virtual machine. It's a basic family, two vCPUs, 4 GB of memory that I have here at this particular DNS address. And if we kind of come over here, I just did apt install the Prometheus, and then we get a couple of configurations. I mean, the first thing is obviously it needs to get running. So to get it running, you need to set it up as a service. I actually used some scripts to essentially create the service files as well as the users for uh, simplifying things and moving things across from one environment to the other, and to script my that's not what I want, progress, which I will share in the resources that I share around this workshop. Right. All right, so this is the one we want, and here you can see this the unit file for the service, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we've got this user and group Prometheus that have been created with those scripts that I was just mentioning, and when we run Prometheus, the binary, there's just a couple of parameters that are passed into the binary at runtime. Here you can see that I've added a couple of extra ones, including the time series database retention time. In the overview video, I did mention that I extended the default. The default is, I believe, 3 months. Maybe it's even 1 month, and I really wanted to store something longer. So with that in mind, I set up additional data disks, and those additional data disks I'm using to essentially provide larger volumes that are here, specifying the time series database path. So that's mapped to another disk on my Azure VM over here. And I've got essentially a hot and a cold disk. The cold one is meant for archiving out old log files and the like. So this is really, I mean, all that there is to this is the default settings for the service that are telling it where to find the libraries. And then this is the config file. So everything else in Prometheus is in the config file. It's extremely easy to get Prometheus going. And if we have a look at that config file, where was that config file? So the Prometheus YAML file here is essentially everything for the configuration. And you can see that there's some default values that are global settings for the scrape interval. By default 15 seconds, and we can set that for the particular nodes that we're going to be scraping. There's some rules that are set. There's some aspects about Alert Manager. I haven't gotten into Alert Manager yet, but this is for alerting and notifications. And specifically what we want here is the scrape config. And here you can see the definition of the different jobs that are created and essentially what they're pointing to. This one is scraping Prometheus itself. Here I have my ThingWorx scrape job that is scraping the ThingWorx/metrics endpoint using basic auth, and with the static configuration for the server address. And then here are some of those other nodes. So this is the node exporter that I mentioned yesterday on the aspects around getting the resources from the VMs, and you can see here that I've just got the different hosts that are listed here. JMX for those two systems that I have the JMX exporter running to get details from the JVM. Graphite for where I have the connection server or Graphite metrics exporter running. And this is that Azure exporter that's grabbing details out of Azure metrics. And so that's about it. That's about it. It's, as you can see, it's quite straightforward as a configuration file, and that's just going to tell Prometheus that it needs to go get those details and it needs to pull them in and do the scraping periodically. So one of the things, once you do get Prometheus set up and running, I mean, I would recommend you check that everybody's listening on the appropriate ports. So if we do something like yeah, can't see what I'm typing here. You know, here we can see that we should be listening on, I believe it's 9090 that Prometheus is listening on, and I didn't set it up with HTTPS. I wanted to keep my installation as simple as possible, so it is running on HTTP with no authentication. So I certainly didn't want to expose that to the internet. So I just essentially created a port forwarding rule for testing purposes that allows me from my specific IP address to be able to hit that 9090 address for Prometheus. And yeah, Safari is a little bit of a pain. It won't let me go there, so I had to go to Firefox to actually be able to get the unsecured HTTP version. And when I come into Prometheus, you'll see this sort of screen. And from here, I mean, I can check the different, those scrape jobs that we saw in the configuration file. And let's look for targets. So those were the definition of the targets in the configuration file. And here you can see that, yeah, it's read in those different targets. You can see any labels that I've applied in the Prometheus YAML file. And most importantly, you can see things like the state. Is this endpoint being scraped? Is it up? When was the last scrape? How long did it take? So this is really this is the essential spot for you to be having a look to see how your scrape jobs are working across the different environments. And then from here, I mean, if we know that we're able to scrape properly, you can come back into here, maybe go to Graph or something like this and just search for something like total writes. Let's just search for total writes. And stream processing, influx persistence provider stream processing, total writes performed. And let's add this. Oops, execute. Okay, so we got, I wanted a graph actually. Yeah, okay, that was not a good one to choose. All right, not exactly the best one to choose. We can also look for things like message meter. These are going to be for zero count. This ought to be changing. There we go. So that one is the messages coming in off the first partition of IoT Hub, and we can see that we do have data that's coming in that's recent. So that's just kind of a sanity check to check our metrics. We know that Prometheus is getting data now, and we should be able to hook it up to Grafana. So let's move over to Grafana. I mentioned that I didn't set up any HTTPS here on Prometheus because this is really just on the internal network and not outward facing, only running inside. Grafana, however, that's not going to be possible so much. So Same thing. I mean, if you just go look for Grafana, you're going to find documentation on how to get it installed. I use the APT repositories. Really simple to get it up and running. And then the next trick is, you know, once you do get it up and running, you've got to hit it. And this is where things got a little complex for me, because you know, there's no question that I was going to put this with authentication on the internet with just HTTP. And the HTTPS configuration requires you to bring your own certificates, which I didn't really want to do. So what I ended up doing seemed to be a good little trick, is used Apache 2 as a reverse proxy in front of Grafana. So basically, if we have a look at let's have a look at Grafana configuration. The Grafana configuration, I did set a few things. You know, here, like the domain, we saw the DNS name that I had to set up on the VM, so that we'll know where we're going to hit, and so that it can know on what public-facing address that it's running. And I definitely put enforce domain, so that you know, we have to be the redirects are going to work accordingly throughout the Grafana application. And this one initially, when I set it up, I didn't need this root URL, but I did need this later on. By providing the root URL, you can see here that it's HTTPS. However, the actual port for Grafana, which is running an HTTP, is 3000, but the 3000 is not available anywhere. So here I'm saying that the actual root URL of Grafana is HTTPS and running on 443. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But while we're in here, just kind of having a look at some of the other things that I had to do, is obviously setting up the database, doing some of the basic configurations, but specifically for SMTP, needed to make it so that users could validate their email address and get invitations. And then set up their own passwords. Obviously, I'm not going to go around setting passwords for people, and I'm not going to set up an SSO connection just yet. So here with the mail enabled, I just installed Postfix. If you just do a web search for installing Postfix on a Linux machine, it's super simple as well. And here I'm just using a basic local SMTP server that's serving as my mail server to send out messages from Grafana, and that's obviously going to be important afterwards when I get alerts and notifications set up, because this is how the messages are going to go out. So I just gave it an address here, set some basic stuff up. Once again, an SMTP mail server, it's only accessible on the local host, so I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So let's go have a look at that Apache 2. So yeah, one of the things that I came across that I'm sure many of you are aware of, Let's Encrypt, and Let's Encrypt uses a tool called Certbot, and the Certbot tool is great because it's a bit of an agent there that's going to run on your machines, that can not only renew your certificates, because they're short-lived certificates provided by Let's Encrypt, so you can use the Certbot tool to essentially auto-renew your certificates and reinstall them on your system. Unfortunately, you can't really do that for, depending on what application you use and how those certificates are loaded, but you can do that for certain proxies, right? Certain web servers that you can use as so you can do that with, if we come in here, like documentation, getting started. Okay, so yeah, it says here we recommend that you use Certbot, right? The client, so you come over to the Certbot website, and it's going to say, okay, what are you doing, right? What have you got? Get instruction software on what system. So you can choose your system that you're running over here, 18, and look, we've got a bunch of things here: Apache, Nginx, HA proxy, other. So, I mean, you can choose really what you want to use. I took Apache. You could use Nginx as well. This is going to help you get started on what you need to do to install Certbot on for Apache. But the nice thing about this is, you can see it's a couple commands using the snap daemon. Once you get the Certbot installed, it's going to go out and automatically create as well as manage those certificates for you. And then we can come back to our Apache configuration. And here you can see that I've just done HTTPS termination to the proxy level, and then the Grafana side is just HTTP. So here I've got the proxy set up for my Grafana connection, localhost 3000, and this is all that you need. So, from my perspective, really simple way to get TLS working on Grafana, as well as auto-generated certificates that are managed through Let's Encrypt, and without having to set too much stuff up. So let's go have a look. And you can see when I get connected in here, I've got the certificate here that's a Let's Encrypt provided certificate. So got Grafana set up, got Prometheus set up, used Apache to do reverse proxy. What else did I want to kind of mention? Obviously, the ports were important. You really need to make sure that everybody's listening on the ports. You can use netstat to do that. There's some other tools as well. And once you kind of get that set up, it's really just a question of starting to play, right? And here we can say, I don't want to add a panel. I'm going to create a new, really want a new dashboard. All right, add a new dashboard, add empty panel. And here you've got your data sources. So those data sources are data sources that have already been set up. So let's actually go back a step and have a look at some of these. So discard data sources, configuration, data sources. You can see I've got a number of data sources that are set up. I mentioned Azure Monitor in the overview video. This is the details to get connected through the not the managed identity, but to my Azure Monitor on the one particular subscription. I've got the Prometheus that's running localhost. They are running on the same machine. This is the default metrics provider and query engine. We've also got InfluxDB metrics. This is the one that I mentioned, also running on a local network. That's providing the InfluxDB internal metrics. And so you can see that I've got just a couple of different data sources set up. Nice thing about Grafana is that it's got so many different data source options. In here you can see Graphite, OpenTSDB, Influx, Prometheus. We've got Loki, Elasticsearch. I mean, this is more for log formats, but there's a ton of different native data source types that we can use if we have metrics that are coming from different places. I'm trying to get them all in kind of concentrated into Prometheus if at all possible, but there's going to be situations where that's not appropriate and doesn't cover all of our needs, right? Something like Loki or Elasticsearch. Here this is going to be providing us log details and log information, which we just don't get in Prometheus. So get those data sources set up. Then you can start to create a dashboard. Just pick your Prometheus thing here, and then we can actually just use the Metrics Explorer to start browsing away. Make that a little bit smaller. To have a look at some of those metrics that we brought in, you can go back to the Prometheus endpoint to the Prometheus environment to have a look at what you've got coming in. But you can also just start searching in here. This is all of my dashboards I just set up by searching. If you know what it's called, like num busy threads, for example, num busy connections. Num busy connections, this is what I wanted on the C3PO interface. So this is coming from the configuration for the GEMX exporter. And use query, there you go. So that one was pretty simple. I can do things like adding the job, right? So if I wanted to be filtering by a particular job, here there's the job, ThingWorx job. as your graphite JMX. As I mentioned, this is coming from JMX. I've only got that metrics on that particular job, so here it's kind of redundant for me to add this, but most of my queries you'll see that I've added this here, and I lost the thing. So right, so here I just specified the job actually, and it's giving me a list of all of the metrics that are coming in off that particular job. So that's kind of another way to look at it, is a little bit more verbose, but you know, you can quickly kind of start to throw these things on a graph and see what metrics you have coming in and start plotting them over time. Okay, that's the start. Next video, we're going to start looking at how to set up those exporters and how to start getting those metrics available to be scraped by Prometheus.